going to be presenting my thesis, Pornography, the Devil's Knife at Humanity's End. There is a monster that has been raging our society for over 30 years, but in complete silence. It has slowly begun taking over children, families, marriages, churches, cities, and our society as a whole. It has done much damage, but is almost never talked about, never discussed, almost never dealt with in a proper way. This monster is pornography. Now, we tend to tread lightly on the idea of sex in our culture. It tends to bring up certain shame aspects and certain tendencies that people don't want to face. However, I believe this can be detrimental to those who have faced real pornography addiction and the issues that revolve around that. Now, early on in life, I had a mentor who came out and told our church about his problem with pornography. And he told me something that I would never forget. He said, there was a hole in my heart and I was desperately trying to fill it. Now, luckily, his marriage was saved by Christ, but that is not common among many marriages where one partner is found out in pornography addiction today. Usually they're broken up, and at least one of the person's lives are ruined, if not both. So my question is this: how can people be so thoroughly damaged by this, be so broken, and it not be discussed, not be mentioned at all, not even tried to be fixed? And more importantly, how can we start fixing it? How can we start the healing process in those affected by it? Now, pornography is a difficult area in which people find disagreement. Most people would generally say that it is unhealthy for you. However, there are two general mindsets that people have towards the issue. They are either ignorant about it and see shame in it, so they do not really want to face it, or they claim that they do not want people in their personal lives, that pornography is a personal issue that people shouldn't face. However, I believe both of these mindsets can be detrimental to those who have faced real pornography addiction. Now, there are a few terms that need defining before I get into some of my finer points in the bulk of my thesis. These are neurotransmitters and dopamine. Now, neurotransmitters are effectively managers for the body. They are sent out secreted within neurons, and they start or end a specific bodily function. Now, one of these neurotransmitters is dopamine. Dopamine is not an inherently bad chemical. It is brought up many times in different talks about addiction, but generally is very healthy for people to have. It is in effect a reminding chemical. It takes an action that the body has done, perceives it as either good or bad, and pushes the body to either do that action again or pushes it away from doing that action again. For instance, if a person is hungry, the brain releases dopamine to push the body to go get nourishment. Or if a person is tired, the dopamine is released to push the body to go get sleep. It is very healthy for a normal person. However, when we are talking about pornography addiction, this is when it becomes an unhealthy problem for all those who have faced it. Now, ultimately, the issue that we are facing with pornography addiction is the societal ignorance of this overall problem. We haven't faced the issue, so there are now mental and societal problems that are rampant as an effect. So in this thesis, I will discuss the accessibility and the mental and societal issues of pornography, and then I will go into how people can get away from pornography and grow, even despite all the issues that they have faced because of it. Now, the accessibility of pornography is one that has been extremely detrimental and really led to the other two effects that I'm going to discuss. With the rise of technological innovation, we also got the rise of easily accessible pornography on any website. In the case of one of the most popular sites, it reaches over 100 million visits a day, releasing 12 videos or 2 hours of content every minute. The site instantly fills any demands that any visitor might have. Now, there are those who would tell you that pornography addiction isn't very real. It's not based upon an addiction, it's really based upon our evolutionary need to procreate. And in effect, it can actually be good for partners in some ways. However, I disagree. And I say that these people have not looked closely enough on the difference between a compulsion and an addiction, since they define it as a compulsion. A compulsion is something that humans normally are pushed to do, but it isn't necessarily detrimental to either their body or their mind. But an addiction is something that is heavily detrimental to both their body and their mind. I believe pornography is an addiction because of the terrible mental detriment that it has on the brain. Now, in the case of one of our most hot and highest affected by it, in the case of people who are most highest affected by it, young males, this is extremely detrimental. Young males are most affected by it because they have the least control over their brain. When I say this, I mean that the chemical imbalance in their brain is so raw and unformed that they are least prepared and most susceptible to the high chemical amounts that are released when they are confronted with pornography. You see, the brain has a prefrontal cortex that is essentially the good decision maker of the mind. However, in the case of pornography, or any addiction really, the prefrontal cortex, or the good decision maker of the mind, is taken over by the chemicals released in the brain. It is taken over, and effectively the chemicals are making the decisions for the body now. Now, there are two stages of an addiction. There's the early stage and the later stage. In the early stage, this is where the brain is the most excited and where the formations that are being made are very new and exciting for the body. New dopamine receptors are being opened to make sure that the body has the same feeling of being high as it did the first time the product was seen. However, as the addiction gets longer and longer, the brain is just heavily impacted by it. It essentially grows desensitized to other things. Now, this is where the dopamine becomes a real problem, because the brain does not want to release the same amount of dopamine as it did, because you are essentially becoming desensitized to normal things. For instance, if a person hangs out with a friend or enjoys a good meal, the brain will not release that dopamine anymore because it no longer recognizes that that is a good action. Essentially, the only high that the brain can get from dopamine is pornography now. Pornography is teaching those addicted to it what can make it happy. It is teaching the body that the only thing that can make it happy is pornography. Now, the mental effects are disastrous enough, but the societal effects of this issue cannot be ignored. Starting off with those most affected, children. Over 97% of young boys have viewed pornography. and over 80% of young girls. New research has shown us that 1 in 10 visitors on adult sites are under the age of 10. In effect, this is becoming sex education to those who find it young enough. And all of this, only 12% of parents know and acknowledge that their child has a problem with pornography. As with all the other statistics, this is a massive disparity, and parents are either refusing to see or just do not know that this is a problem that their children are facing. Along with that, there are also the effects that it has had on the church and church leadership. Did you know that 1 in 5 youth pastors have been affected by this, and 1 in 7 senior pastors? It has not missed church leadership. In fact, it might be where it hit it the hardest. Among church members as well, many church members have stated that they have struggled with this in the past or now and view pornography at least once a month. Also, in these statistics, there's a massive disparity because only 7% of churches in the U.S. have specific programs dealing with this issue. Finally, possibly the darkest effect of mainstream pornography addiction is the effect that it has had on sexual abuse imagery cases. In 1998, there were reportedly 3,000 sexual abuse imagery cases. In 2014, the number had risen to 1 million. Finally, in 2018, there were 18.4 million sexual abuse imagery cases. The median age for the people who are normally prosecuted because of these is around 39, and the majority of them are male. In fact, these are harder to deal with than regular abuse because it is almost impossible to entirely delete all the footage that was taken. You see that pornography has hit our world in such deep, harmful ways. And it has not missed any part of the society that we live in. People are growing more and more desensitized to it, and they are looking for harder porn to grow even higher than they were before. Now, you can see that we are in a bleak situation. It's really dark, and we can't really see the light on the other side. However, I believe that through certain steps, we can begin growing away from this deep, dark hole that we have dug ourselves into. One thing to remember as I go further into the dealing with this problem is that I am not calling for specific government intervention into this issue. I don't believe that the government can effectively heal a heart or a mind issue, especially not dealing with pornography. However, there are certain things that we as a community and a society can do to reach out to those who have come out and told their struggle. Now, the most important step is obviously that. Coming out and telling a trusted person, a trusted good person, about your struggle with pornography. As I have mentioned in the past, there are certain shames that revolve around pornography, and people tend to not want to face that, either themselves or somebody else that they know. So the most important step is coming out and talking about it. Now, there are other important steps also, such as accountability. Accountability can be very helpful to a person who is either wary about pornography or sees themselves in a trap with pornography and looking for a way out. As I have mentioned, the church has problems with pornography, but the church can provide more than one healthy, godly person to help stop this pornography addiction that is affecting a person's life. Now, I really want people who have been deeply affected by pornography to know two things. That there is healing, and that they are not alone. The devil wants people who have been affected by pornography to think that there is no way out of this, and that they are the only person who struggles with it. However, it is statistically unlikely that you will not meet a person who has not deeply struggled with pornography in the past, if they are not struggling with it now. So, to come out and talk about your addiction is vitally important to you and to our society as a whole. Now, again, this is a dark situation. We might think that there is no healing that can happen. But I believe the healing can start. And I know this because Christ is on our side with this issue. And Christ has never left us alone. Christ will always be there to heal us. Thank you. If there are any questions from the panelists or the audience, I would like to take them.
Thank you for your willingness to research and go into a topic that I know is not easy to do. And I'm sure that when you were working through it, you were seeing that you were just hitting the surface of it. It is a very deep-rooted and insidious subject. I know that. So I have two questions. Just going back and looking at your thesis, that pornography has been largely ignored, and the effects are massive. Okay, so you bring up two sides of that. What I see is the governmental, legislative maybe, and then the church with accountability. So I wonder how much in your research, when you're looking, I know you chose not to go the direction of government viewing this topic, but I want to know if you've ever thought of relating that, say, to the abortion topic. Because your argument was basically it's a heart and mind issue, and therefore you don't see it as a supply line maybe issue, more, I know you enough to know pastorally you have a heart for affecting the church, and I appreciate that. But I do think that if we don't address the issues from this, because now more and more thinking back to Caitlin Cruz and her issue with the sex slave trade, more of what goes on in pornography is illegal, such as the rape of women, sexual slavery, and things like that. So I do believe that that side of it is essential to address. Just something to look at down the road. Because I do believe what you're saying about with Christ in it and with his instruments, the church has a response to it. Okay. So with that, in terms of accountability groups, how much in your research did you see what type of accountability groups were working and effective? I know you said only 7% of churches are utilizing these kind of programs. And what do you put forth as a type of accountability program that you see would be effective?
That's a very good question. My research did not take me specifically in that area, but I would say that I think the best accountability that can happen is personally, especially with church leadership who may or may not have struggled with it in the past. I feel like good church leadership is good. A good church leader is good at reaching out to their members, to their sheep, and to talk about these issues with them, and to build really this. For accountability to take place, there needs to be trust built on both sides. And I think that good church leadership will have a good enough trust built up with their sheep that they can discuss the issue personally with them without having improper rehabilitation methods applied, like bringing the issue out into the entire community to where now every person knows the deep struggles of this individual. And that is a burden certainly for the pastors, but I believe it is a necessary burden for them for the true healing that needs to take place. Thank you for that question.
And as a follow-up, why do you think obviously the shame issue is part of this, but why do you think Christians are afraid to speak out and against the pornography industry? To say the same degree that they are the abortion?
I would say it is because they themselves or someone they know has been deeply affected by it. Those who have struggled with pornography, as I mentioned in my thesis, have a wall of shame built around the topic. And as I've said, a majority of the population has dealt with it and has tried to hide their shame. And the wall that they're trying to climb around is just too tall for them. The shame that they don't want brought into the open is just too tall, so they refuse to really face it. And they think there's going to be, in my opinion, this comes directly from the devil, there's going to be major societal punishment on them for having struggled with this issue. But that's why I said at the end, I want them to know that there is healing that can take place, and there are other people who have struggled with this. They are not alone in this. There is growth. Thank you, Ms. Bell. Yes, Dr.
I commend you as well for tackling this sticky topic that a lot of young men and women just wouldn't address. They'd be awkward, they just wouldn't have, and you've done a great job of researching it. And you've handled it with real professionalism, so I commend you for that. And I think everybody in this room is so thankful for a God, a Father, who has the healing in his wings for us for these things. What kind of appeal would you make outside of this room, where we love and know him, to a person for whom God is not their Father, and for whom the Bible is not the ultimate authority? What kind of appeal do you think you can make to them to walk away from or disentangle themselves from a pornographic addiction?
That's a very good question. The appeal that I would make to them is think about what you're doing to your family. Or if you don't have a family, think about what you're doing to your job. Think about how it's affecting your performance, either as a father, businessman, or just a worker in a certain way. You are affecting every aspect of your life. You're growing addicted to a product that is demanding more and more of you. So the appeal that I would make to them is this is still a major effect on your life. And if you care at all about your wife, your children, or your career, that you will look to help from someone to help grow away from this. Thank you, Dr.
I know that you looked at outside, more secular sites, Fight the New Drug, things like that. Did you find a growing amount of voices outside the church that were willing to address this topic in society?
That's a good question. I certainly did. There are more and more statistics coming out every day about especially the effect that it has on our children and the sexual abuse imagery cases that have been cropping up because of this issue. And I believe that, especially in the U.S., there are some dirty statistics that are beginning to come into the light, and people are just deeply affected by that. And they're seeing the way it affects their family, even if they didn't see it before. So I believe that as those just rotten things begin to come out, more and more people are willing to stand up and face this issue, even if they have been affected by
it. First of all, that was incredible. I want to congratulate you on giving your senior thesis, and not only that, but completing that entire journey, which I know can be really, it gets you. But the question I want to ask is, how can, like you said, the first thing to do is go to a trusted person and, admit that you have this problem. So as that trusted person, how can you help the person who has, come out with their addiction with pornography? How can you help them in a way without showing that it's a shameful thing? How can you approach that issue of helping that person?
That's a good question. I would say that the thing that needs to take place, that trust that needs to start begins right there when they say their addiction, and that you need to just tell them if you yourself have struggled with it, or you just need to tell them, as I said in my thesis, that there is healing that can take place. Because I would say for most people who are coming out to talk about their addiction, they are facing that wall of shame, and they're trying to climb over it. So what you need to do is you need to help push them further, and to get them over that wall, you need to tell them that there is a way out, and that because that you have come to them discussing it, you are already on your way out of this, already on your way to being healed. And just be an encouragement to them always. And that is most important.
So early on you said that accessibility is kind of like the genesis of all the snowball effect of this problem. I'm curious if you thought about how to affect accessibility today.
That is the root of the problem. Thank you for that question. That's really where what showed in my research is that, oh wow, this is really where it begins. I would say it is very helpful for parents, especially because, as I discussed, those being affected widely are children, are young children. Where are they getting that access? Devices, websites, anything. So I would say for parents who want to help curb this, try to limit at least device time and not allow your children access to these devices when they are not old enough to understand, not even fully, not even a little bit, what things that they can find on the internet. And begin discussing with them the dangers of things that you can find. I believe my father did a great job of that, and I believe that parents can, even if they have struggled with it, especially if they have, begin limiting screen time, setting up certain apps or anything on their child's device to help block any negative ads or websites from cropping up. I think there is a definite curve that can take place if we stop allowing our children just immediate access to it. Thank you.
And I guess I have one more question. So we believe that Christians have the Holy Spirit, and as you're describing this, according to one stat, 4 in 10 senior pastors look at pornography on a daily basis. That's kind of shocking stat. 64% of men in the church, at least, are addicted to it likely.
Mm-hmm.
Like, how can that be? Why do you think that is? And because it seems like the prevalence of it speaks to something really shocking.
That is a really good question, and it brings up a few topics, because as I discussed in my mental effects, the prefrontal cortex. The prefrontal cortex is the good decision maker. Well, some of my research showed, actually, from a certain individual in Birmingham who runs a nonprofit organization around this issue. he told me about the effects that it has on the mind, because our prefrontal cortex knows and acknowledges the love of Christ and God, and it acknowledges that we have the Holy Spirit with us. And so, as I discussed in that particular part of my thesis section, it doesn't decrease for Christians who are affected by it. In fact, it increases exponentially. I would say that Christian leaders and Christian members, or church members, are being so deeply affected by it is because it's reaching them young. It's because that they have seen it at too young of an age to properly recognize that this is a very negative thing. And by the time that they have acknowledged Christ is their Savior and they have put their faith in Him, they are already deep in this issue. They are already deep in pornography addiction. So the same healing there needs to take place. And church leaders and church members need to recognize that people in their church do struggle with this, as I mentioned in my stats. And to face the issue, we need to do it together, not alone.
Thank you for looking at this important and challenging issue.
Well, if there are no further questions, I would like to thank each of y'all for listening, and I would hope that you have more of a heart for those who have struggled with pornography addiction and reach out to those who have. If there are any further questions, you can reach me at my email, silaswhill@gmail.com. And I appreciate the administration and my help from Dr. Wheeler and Mr. Bowe and Mrs. Harper about this issue, and we appreciate all of you. Thank you very much.